and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about Matthew Perry's new memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, which I have my first edition copy right here. I listened to this on Audible, but I bought the first edition copy shortly after because I'll just get right to it and say that I really, really liked this memoir, and I want to physically read it because as I was listening, there were just so many things I wanted to highlight, but I couldn't because it was an audiobook, so eventually I will go through the actual book and I will annotate and highlight so much because there were just so many things, so many good nuggets in this book, so many good lines, so many good epiphanies he had, and so I know I will definitely reread this and definitely be highlighting it. And I will be talking spoilers in this book review, which I say spoilers, but I'll just be touching on some things he talks about in the book, which might tell you what ends up happening. But again, it feels weird to call it a spoiler when I'm discussing a celebrity memoir, but you can still watch this review. And even though I'm going to talk about some specific events he talks about, you could still go and read it and gain a lot from it. But if you don't want to read it, you could watch this review and kind of get the gist. But Matthew Perry, for those who don't know, is famous for playing Chandler Bing on the TV show Friends. And so I was curious to read it for that fact, but I also knew that he struggled with addiction, so I figured he would talk about that to some extent as well, so I was interested in reading it for that. And it turns out that not only does he talk about it, his struggle with addiction is the focus of this book. And so once I realized that was the focus, which right in the first chapter he's talking about his colon exploding due to drinking and pills and just the damage it did to his body. So right from the start, you're getting that intense story. And so it sets the tone and you realize, okay, this story is about addiction. And I was thrilled because I love reading books about addiction. And so I am a bit biased because I do love books about addiction and I have seen every episode of Friends. It's a lot of them I've seen multiple times. There's a few that are kind of cringy and I skip, but I am a fan of the show, and so both of those two things might make me biased going into this review. But yeah, even when he talks about his childhood, he sees it through the lens of addiction because he looks at certain events that happened as a child and how it caused him to have these different insecurities and confidence issues, which led him to then rely on alcohol and pills to just feel normal and to feel secure in his own skin. And the struggle he has with loneliness is a huge theme in this book. So growing up, his parents got divorced when he was very young. And so he was an only child for quite some time. But when he was a little kid, people would call him an only child. But he thought they were calling him a lonely child, which was sad, but also something just what's the endearing? Is that the right word? Where it's just this little boy who is lonely and he mishears and instead thinks people are calling him a lonely child instead of an only child. So that loneliness is something that he took with him in adulthood, that fear of loneliness, coupled with the fear that he was not good enough. And so when he would date women, he would worry that eventually they would realize he wasn't good enough and then they would dump him and he would be rejected and he would be left all alone. But it became like a self-fulfilling prophecy because then instead a relationship would be going great, but he would break up with her because he wanted to beat her to it. And so he'd be like, eventually she'll break up with me and she'll find out I'm not good enough. So I'm going to beat her to it and I'm going to break up with her. But then it left him all alone, which is why he had fear to begin with. And he talks about dating Julia Roberts and how he dumped her and how she was so confused when it happened because the relationship was going great, but his insecurities flared up being like, why is she with me? She's gonna dump me eventually, And he talks about a number of different women where he regrets not committing and not settling down and not starting a family because now he's 53 years old and he lives all alone and he has nobody. And so loneliness is just a huge theme in this book. And it's something, now he has the self-confidence and the self-love that he lacked all those years, but he is living with the consequences of his actions when he was younger because he doesn't have a wife or kids. And so if only he had found that self-compassion and self-love earlier in life, then he wouldn't have feared commitment, But yeah, this fear of loneliness, this feeling like he was never good enough, this feeling of just not being comfortable in his own skin led him to alcohol when he was 15. And then eventually he started doing pills as well, like opiates. But then also to get off alcohol, they put you on barbiturates and benzos. And so he just had all sorts of pills going on in his system. And so we hear a lot about his struggle with drinking, and as that progressed as he got older, as well as the many rehab visits he's had, as well as his road to recovery and his work in AA, because he's a big AA person and he sponsors people, and he had sponsors who made a big difference in his life. But with the rehabs, it seems like he definitely has a jaded view of a lot of rehabs and that they're just in it for the money and that they basically like shoot you when you're down. And I've never been to a rehab, but I do know people who have been, and I know enough about the system that I kind of have the same view where a lot of them do just seem to be in it for the money. So I thought it made sense that he kind of had a jaded view about it as well. He did talk about one rehab that he really liked in Utah, Cirque, I think was the name, and how there was a guy there that just really had a big impact on him, and this was later in his addiction. And the guy accused him of being like, you know, I think you purposefully keep going back to addiction because you like it. You like the drama of it. Maybe you like the attention. Like, there's a reason you keep going back. It's not because you just can't help it. There's something about it that draws you to it and you choose to keep doing it. And at first, Matthew Perry was very defensive, being like, you think I choose this? Like, what kind of a crazy person would choose this? How dare you say that? But then as he reflected, he realized like, wow, like I am the kind of crazy person who would choose this. And also when you lack the self-love too, like it makes sense that if you don't love yourself and you don't think you're good enough, then it makes sense that you would put yourself through the hell, which is substance abuse and withdrawing from those substances, and then just everything that it does to you physically and mentally and emotionally. And so he realized there was truth to it, and he did keep going back to it for these various reasons. And so I thought that was a really interesting part. But he also does talk too about how it's also just in his genetics and his biology where, you know, he has control over the first drink, but after that, like, he doesn't have control. And even the first drink, he wouldn't start drinking because he just wanted to have a good time. He was drinking just to feel normal and to feel comfortable. And so the difference there between different drinkers, right? And why with him it was like such a bigger issue. And he also talks about his faith in God, which I thought was really cool. And he shares a specific experience, which this was after Friends, I want to say. Yeah, I'm pretty positive this was after Friends. He did have 2 years of sobriety while filming Friends. Season 9 like overlapped those 2 years. So in season 9, he's sober and he thinks it's his best season, and he was nominated for an Emmy for season 9. And he says, you know, it's because I was sober and doing so well. But anyway, at some point after that, he had this spiritual experience where he felt a connection with God and God's presence and his love and just the power of God. And that led him to stay away from alcohol. And so he talks about that and how he's felt God's love since then, like in the eyes of a alcoholic who he helps get sober, and just these different beautiful moments in life where he feels God's love for him and for those around him. And so that again is another theme throughout this book, which I thought was really beautiful, and I like that he included that. And he is very candid and open and vulnerable in this book, and sharing that spiritual experience I think is a vulnerable thing to share, because he admits that people could write it off and say that it's, you know, it wasn't God, it was, you know, X, Y, or Z. But he's like, say what you will, but it meant something to me, and it's something that he has held on to as the years have gone on. And he stayed away from alcohol. He has had pill relapses, but still. And then he does talk about his rise to stardom thanks to being cast as Chandler on Friends. And he says how when he read for the character of Chandler, he immediately was like, this is me, like I am Chandler. But even after he was cast, the creators would meet with all of the actors and just get to know them, and they would incorporate things, like they incorporated things about Perry and into the character of Chandler. So, you know, Chandler is fictional, but a lot of Perry's own mannerisms and his own things are in Chandler, you know, deflecting by using humor, for example, and just sarcasm and having family issues and not wanting to commit, you know, that's a big thing with Chandler as well. And yeah, he loved being on the show Friends, and so we do hear about that and the connection he made with all 6 of them. He doesn't like go in depth into it, but he does talk about it. And he talks about too, after the first season, David Schwimmer is the one who like had the most clout. Like what was normal was to negotiate your contract individually. And so David Schwimmer could have negotiated to get a lot of money and just been like, and you people get whatever you're gonna get, negotiate yourself basically. But he came to all of them and was like, we should negotiate as a group so that we are all getting paid the same amount. And so Perry really admired Schwimmer for that, because it was very selfless of him wanting to have this attitude of we're all in this together and we're all equal. And so yeah, I thought that was really cool as well. And obviously it served them well, because by season 10 they were making over $1 million per episode. And then to talk about the negatives of this book, which I just have a few complaints, one of them being that he did seem kind of full of himself at times, which is to be expected though. Honestly, I wasn't too surprised by that. But he brags about having the #1 TV show in America while at the same time having the #1 movie come out, the whole 9 yards. And then other things, just how like the way Chandler talks on Friends was something that he was like how he would talk when he was in high school with his buddies. And he brought that to the character of Chandler, and he talks about like, oh, like Chandler's weird emphasis on words, like changed the American language and changed how we speak, because no one was talking like that until I came on Friends. And maybe that's true, I don't know, but he was pretty cocky about it and brought it up multiple times. And then also there were some stories he shared that just came across as kind of petty, like it wasn't necessary to tell, or at least not to tell it in the way he did, where it was kind of like shifting the blame on other people. But he definitely didn't do that like throughout the book. Like he acknowledged, you know, his responsibility in his life choices and what happened. And even as a kid, he said how his mom didn't give him as much attention as he wanted. And he's like, granted, you know, it would have been impossible for her to give me as much attention as I wanted because I wanted so much attention, because he was just like very needy. And into adulthood, he became kind of needy as well. But then he would sabotage his relationships. But anyway, all in all, though, I would recommend this book to people who like memoirs, people who like reading about addiction, anyone who just like really loves Chandler Bing. But if you're like just like a Friends fan, but not necessarily Matthew Perry in particular, I wouldn't recommend this book, I don't think, because especially if you don't fall into the other categories I just listed. Because if you're wanting something that's like just focused on Friends, that's not this book. You'll get some tidbits, you know, there's a section in there, but for the most part, it's about addiction. So if that is what interests you, you should definitely check it out. And like I said, also, if you just like memoirs, as far as celebrity memoirs go, this one is actually pretty good. Like I said, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So I would recommend it to the right person, because I could see some people being disappointed by it. And I did read some negative reviews, which there's quite a few negative reviews. I read those after I finished it. And I was like, man, like I really liked it. And yet so many people are not giving it a good review. So I was a little surprised by that, but you know, to each their own. But yeah, this is one I plan on reading a second time, as I said. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. So I guess that wraps it up on my book review for Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing. By the way, if you saw my October reading wrap up, I talked about how I was getting ready to move, and I am now moved into our new home, and I have a new lighting situation going on. I don't know if you can tell that it looks different, but still trying to get things set up and adjusted, and got my Christmas decorations up already. But as soon as my hair's messing up, but as soon as this room is like all set up, I'm really happy with how it's coming together. So I'll do like a library room tour, not a bookshelf tour, just like a tour of the room, because yeah, I think it's turning out really cool so far. And yeah, anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.